Welcome back, Tombs. One Dragon here with another Cyberpunk 2077 video, continuing to take a look at the unlisted changes I've experienced so far. Patch 1.5 is shaping up to have the most amount of unlisted changes in any patch thus far, and it feels like a lot of these changes have been in the works for a long time now. This video will go over some different topics from my previous one, including some interesting changes and corrections, changes to looting and crafting, a more in-depth look at the new clothing mechanics and stats, and then more spoilers, mostly in Act 2. So a couple of things that I missed in the last video was I mentioned the fast travel points for Ripperdocs. There's also a couple more, one for Charles and Cassius in Watson. Next, I discussed shadows in the last video, specifically looking at hair, but I noticed that it also shows the helmet, and most noticeably the rice hat. One thing I noticed in Pacifica in patch 1.31, there were these floating structures in the background that always bothered me. However, in patch 1.5, there seems to be an entire building in its place. There's a lot of speculation about future additions to the game being an expansion of Pacifica, and this could be more evidence for that, or it could just be a bug fix. Another thing that I noticed was the knife attack combo was changed. The third attack used to have a stabbing motion similar to when you attack while blocking. However, now it just seems to be more slashing. Alright, so taking a look at the loot changes. In every playthrough, I regularly visit specific locations to collect crafting specs for legendary weapons. For example, Ashura could be found on a rooftop in Kabuki. Chow could be found on a yacht or a boat on the west side of the city center, and this legendary precision rifle spec could be found at this raid camp. However, in patch 1.5, they seem to have removed these easy access legendary crafting specs from containers in missions or the open world. These examples and other weapons could be looted from multiple locations, either from NCPD events, other missions, gigs, or gun vendors, so they're still available but just later in the game. In patch 1.5, a lot of extremely powerful gun attachments were added to the game as shown in the additional content tab, where they normally put what they previously called DLCs. In the patch notes, they specifically mentioned Wilson's store as the place to get these items. However, I have confirmed that you can find them in containers, and if you leave them and return to those locations at a high enough level, they can be epic, which is seemingly the highest tier that they can reach at the moment. Keep in mind that the rarity is RNG, so you may need to save scum or walk far enough away and then come back to make sure that they're epic. The next big change to looting is the randomization of clothing and gun mod crafting specs. Overall, there are a lot less loot containers, especially during missions or gigs. Of the remaining containers, some had their loot changed, but in the case of these crafting specs, it seems to be entirely random as to which one you can find. In my playthrough, I spent a lot of time re-walking through the streets and inspecting containers to see if I could find the new clothing mods, crafting specs, or items. Personally, I found a lot of the regular mod crafting specs simply by walking around Watson, because seemingly many of the loot boxes had their inventory changed to include either new items or crafting specs. For those of you that have been looking at my old guides, there's also still 3 in the basement of the Wraith camp where the mission Riders of the Storm occurs. So far, I have yet to find any new crafting specs for the new mods or melee mods, so I'm unsure if those will eventually be added. For now, you can purchase most of the new mods from clothing stores or find them in containers or on clothing already. Moving on to crafting. Crafting received a lot of changes in patch 1.5, some of which I covered in the other video, including being able to preview the clothing on your character, and the removal of randomized weapon stats at a legendary tier. However, since then, I've come across a few other notes that I wanted to share. First of all, in patch 1.3, they added legendary versions of mods, so I made a video covering the levels at which crafting specs upgraded to each tier starting from common. Regardless, now it shows what level each tier is unlocked at the top right of the crafting window. Level 4 progression for uncommon, level 9 for rare, level 14 for epic, and level 18 for legendary. These are the same as in patch 1.3. If you are not spec'd into crafting, you can still purchase up to epic tier mods from either clothing stores or the gun stores. The crafting cost of legendary gun mods have been increased. Last patch they didn't require any legendary components and may have been bugged, so it just shared the epic requirements. On another note, there are new crafting specs for Berserker mods at Ripper Docks, so for those that invest heavily into the body tree and use the Berserker operating system, there's more options available. Just keep in mind that when you're buying some of these from stores, they are RNG, so you may need to skip 24 hours before you find them, and I believe the Sandevistan and the Beast Mode mod were already in the game prior to patch 1.5. Moving on to clothing. Clothing in patch 1.5 received a listed change stating that they've adjusted the amount of modification slots available on clothing items. I felt as if this point needed a more detailed explanation, so I'll explain some general rules that apply to clothing, and after, I'll discuss some clothing which are exceptions to these rules. First of all, in comparison to patch 1.3, the maximum mod slots on clothing have been reduced from 20 to 9, and mods themselves have been significantly reduced in stats. However, all tiers of clothing now have mod slots available. Common, uncommon, and rare can have one slot in each piece, while epic can have 2 slots on both upper body pieces, but only 1 slot on the leggings. Finally, we have legendary, which can have 2 slots on the legs and both upper body pieces, for the maximum amount of mod slots available. When selecting clothing, the question then becomes, would you prefer more mod slots or the new clothing stats which can replace 1 mod slot on each piece of clothing? Some of the best potentially being the Showtime or Predator variations, Quick Hack cooldown, crit damage, and damage mitigation. However, as some of the people in the comments have mentioned, there are some clothing types which seem to have set stats. For example, tech goggles always have extra weapon zoom, BD wreaths and glass improvisers always provide quick hack upload time, balaclavas seem to always have reduced visibility to enemies, most of the kabuto and helmets have melee damage reduction, trench coats have electrical resistance, tactical vests have reload time reduction, cargo pants have bonus carry capacity, bustier or bras have mitigation chance, and net running suits have quick hack damage reduction. There are more examples, but regardless, some clothing seem to follow a particular theme and can potentially be swapped out if you'd like those specific stats in place of clothing mods. Another note is that there are 2 restrictions on modding clothing. The first is that some mods are restricted to specific pieces like Fortuna on facewear or movement speed on boots. The other new restriction is that higher tier mods cannot be applied to lower tier clothing. So for example, I can't apply legendary tier mods on epic tier clothing. On the other hand, there are some exceptions to these rules. Firstly, on my level 50 character, I have a lot of loot already in my inventory, and despite that loot typically being categorized in one of those specialized groups, they just have open mod slots instead of the new stats. Another exception to the rules are the sets of legendary clothing you can find in the open world. I tend to grab some of those legendary clothes if they match a specific style that I'm going for new characters. Some pieces within these sets don't have the same specialized stats. For example, I found these tech goggles, which would typically have that bonus weapon zoom, but these ones can have other stats or just have a free open mod slot. Another strange exception is I have found many face pieces that have legendary mods, despite the piece itself not being legendary. You can get these pieces from just farming regular enemies or even from clothing stores. A final note on clothing is that collecting clothing in Cyberpunk can be one of the biggest money sinks in the game, at least at a high level. But fortunately, they've significantly reduced the price of clothing compared to last patch. Okay, on to the spoiler section. Currently, I've just finished playing Act 2 and completed only a handful of gigs, so I'm sure there'll be more to find in future. First of all, Ghost Town, or Panam's questline when you go to retrieve her vehicle from the Raffen. The Mohawk Raffen, who holds the key to Panam's car, now moves inside the powered building instead of just idling outside by the car.
For the girl with the mohawk.
Call the bunch.
It's a trap. Look around. Nooks and crannies. I'll be inside. Holler when you see them.
Could cut off everything. Here, I can. Lock down.
So who turned orange?
Also, the lighting has been improved when you return Panam's car. It was particularly bad if you decided to stealthily steal the car and drive it to the designated meeting place without any lights.
Sure. Leave the driving to the pros. At last.
And she's prime wheels, isn't she?
Dreamy indeed. No surprise you wanted her back.
She completes me.
In patch 1.3, enemy tech snipers were the only tech users that could hit through walls. However, this seems to be fixed and applied to other enemy AI types. A good example is Nash, who uses the Widowmaker, or just general tech pistol users. During the questline Riders of the Storm, there used to be a precision rifle crafting spec by Sol in the basement. As mentioned earlier, this one has been removed. And there was also a mini-boss that dropped 2 problem solvers. However, now he only drops the 1. Next, from my knowledge, there are 2 quests that had 2 bonus perk shards. One is an NCPD quest in Japantown. In the previous patch, there was 1 perk shard on each body, however now there's only the 1. The other mission was Gimme Danger in Arasaka Park when you hack Hanako's float. There was 1 free perk shard in the guard's office outside the warehouse, and another one in a room connecting the underground vents and the warehouse. The latter one, the one in that room, was removed. Continuing on to the parade, first change was a handful of mechs and an AV overlooking spectators. I don't remember them being there in patch 1.3. I'm also not sure how many people know about this one, but there's a hidden tunnel after the first sniper. Takamura will say that he doesn't know how to open it, but you can open it via quick hacks.
As I said, get to the balcony with the green arrow. The sniper will be yours.
Got it open.
Wars, one likes to hear from a thief who is your ally.
If you're willing to fix my back, I'm in.
Although this pathway was already here in the prior patch, there was a legendary crafting spec for the Panacea clothing mod. However, it is now a trauma team vest, so if you want to collect that. Although this was a listed change, I wanted to highlight Oda's optical camo effects. The optical camo Kerenzikov and Sandivision effects are now more noticeable, especially when he uses it offensively, and he finally hides his mantis blades when he goes to retreat.
This was his duty.
You can still defeat him in one clip or half a clip if you know how to stack ricochet damage, but I'll make a separate video about that. During Disaster Piece, they've improved the lighting when you get in the van with Judy.
Make sure the wreath's snug on you. You'll watch while I edit in real time. The old one too.
During the mission I Walk the Line, Sasquatch has a couple of new voice lines if you let her catch you.
Got her! Ready for some fun?
They also cleaned up an animation where if you decide to kill Bryce Mosley at any point, despite him already being dead, B would punch him again despite already being down.
Jacking into our friend now.
One of the last things I noticed in the Voodoo Boy crypt is a changed shard called Netwatch Regional Agents. I believe this is a shout out or an Easter egg for the CDPR forum mods. Let me know because I don't recognize the names. These were more of the significant changes that I've noticed so far in patch 1.5. As I continue to play through the story and side gigs, I will likely find more changes. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it feels like patch 1.5 has the most unlisted or hidden changes in any patch thus far, and a lot of these changes have probably been in the works for a long period of time. Personally, I think this time that they invested in fine-tuning a lot of things has paid off, but let me know what you guys think of the changes in the comments and if you've noticed anything extra yourselves. There's plenty of other areas that I want to cover on Cyberpunk 2077, so consider subscribing. I'll see you next time, Tooms.